we're about to go live. And I'm sure you've been told just anything confidential, don't traverse in a public hearing.
Okay.
Good morning and welcome to the fourth day of the third week of the online intermediation platforms market inquiry. Today we have a mixed bag. We are rounding off the auto classified section with Sandown Motor Holdings, a business user on the auto platforms or portals. That's first up. And following that, we've got Bolt Foods, which is food delivery. That wraps up the morning session, and then in the afternoon, we've got Avis looking at car rental platforms, eDreams, and that's flight platforms, and they're more a European-based platform that also has some presence domestically. We've got Intercape to talk about bus tickets online, and then we're wrapping up today with Savrala, which is the Vehicle Rental Association. I think it's maybe important just to indicate that tomorrow morning we are starting at 10 with Samsung. They were rescheduled, if you recall, from the first week. They have brought on board the international members, and we will have a translation service just to assist with that. And the rest of the morning is Price Check and Red Puppy, an e-commerce platform, and we won't be operating in the afternoon tomorrow. I will announce for next week our times. We've got just a few wrap-up participants in terms of Par Leads, Driver Foods and food delivery, and then of course Take-A-Lot, and we'll announce those schedules tomorrow morning. But with that done, let me introduce Sandown Motors, and I think we've got Roy McAllister and Dennis Peterson. Welcome, Roy and Dennis. Gentlemen, I think you're on mute. And just to introduce you, obviously to myself, James Hodge, but also Ms. Doris Tsepe, who's a fellow panel member. And then we do have our technical team. We've got Mr. Tani, Mr. Radinku, and Mr. Lesofi. So, Roy, if you want to go ahead with your presentation, then we'll have a few questions for you.
Thank you so much, James. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. First of all, I'll just run through the main points of our presentation before continuing. The first is a brief introduction to Sandown Motor Holdings, and then we'll talk about our dependency on these platforms, followed by customer behavior that to a certain extent has driven this, and the ranking and customer search of customer search on these platforms, and there's some backup stats as well. So just briefly, in the introduction of Sandown, I'm one of the founding shareholders. We started business in 1982, so next year we'll be celebrating our 40th anniversary, and something we're very proud of. The group now has been trimmed down quite considerably for various reasons, and we now operate out of 3 passenger car dealerships in what is known as the Gauteng West Brand Centre, namely Constantia Kloof in Roodepoort, Bryanston, and in Sandton Central as well. We also have 3 commercial vehicle dealerships centred in the Pretoria Centurion region and also in Roodepoort. So that in essence is where we are now. As far as our dependency on the online platforms is concerned, as with the fluctuation of time, the industry generally and customers have moved away to a large extent from the print media. A few years ago, we relied heavily on those huge ads in the major newspapers, but today it's moved to online. And I guess to a large extent, the move to online has been hastened to a degree by the experience of the pandemic in the last while. We rely clearly heavily on the digital media for advertising our products. We have an average of 140 vehicles advertised at any given time on these platforms. The platforms are crucial, as I've said, to our pre-owned operation in particular, and we use AutoTrader in the main for this purpose. However, we've tried as a company to set up our own platform, but the sheer size or penetration we had was minimal. We do use the likes of Mercedes-Benz dealer web, which is useful, but there's no doubt that the bigger the platform, the better for us, hence using AutoTrader. The question of customer behavior is the next thing I'd like to deal with. And I think it would be fair to say in the last 2 years, 2018 and 2019, as a result of the economic slowdown in economic activity, we went through a very difficult period, the industry as a whole. And the final knockout punch, as we say in our presentation, was in fact COVID-19 in the first half of 2020, when our sales plunged to historic lows and volumes that we haven't seen in years. One thing that has come out of this, and I guess is really is to the benefit of the consumer, their greater reliance on online and the efficiency of online purchases. So we're finding, whereas in the past we never really thought the big ticket items like cars would be sold online, they are indeed being sold now. And this is yet another reason for using the likes of AutoTrader, the online platform. The effect of the new vehicle shortages, as well as the effect of COVID-19 on consumer incomes, has resulted in an increasing number of consumers are looking for used vehicles. And this is, again, driven by share economics. So used vehicles, in our instance, are increasingly important, and we have been further adversely affected, like all other manufacturers, by the semiconductor shortage, which is impacting production volumes throughout the world. And finally, approximately 75% of our sales are actually from online sources, online platforms. These are just some stats based on the 2020 AutoTrader biannual car industry report. Mercedes-Benz products ranked second amongst all searches, which is very interesting, and with the C-Class ranking third overall in terms of model searches. And that is really food for thought when one looks at the overall market and the popularity of the product, and especially in this medium. And there you have these stats. Yeah. Digital adoption continues to increase, and therefore it is imperative that we advertise on trusted and well advertised sites. And here's just some stats about AutoTrader. It's SA's #1 automotive classified site. It has over 460 million page views. I mean, it's incredible. Searches actually conducted amount to 319 million, and just visits are 55. So those are the key numbers that apply to Auto Trader. Customer advert views are over 149 million, and the average time on the site is 5 minutes 54 seconds. The Sandown number of views in our listing amount to 306,000 a year, dealer pages as they call it. So we as a company are supportive of fair and effective competition on the online platforms. We believe in an inclusive economy and welcome any new entrants that positively contribute to effective competition and our business case. And we remain at your disposal to answer any further questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roy. I wonder you can stop sharing the presentation, then I think we can see you more. There we go. Thank you very much for your perspective. I'm just going to go straight into the online platforms, obviously, because that's our focus in this inquiry. I mean, what are the... I see you've listed Cars.co.za and Auto Trader. I assume you list on those two, is that right?
Yes, we do.
And why do you choose those two? What are your criteria for which platforms you list on?
It's the exposure that we get and the cost per unit of doing so. We're looking at cost and the results, the revenue that we generate from that. So it's very much economies of scale, if you like.
And have you tried any of the other platforms? I mean, we heard from CarFind. I think people have mentioned Surf for Cars and others. And what has your experience been if you have tried?
We've tried various platforms, but ultimately our focus has always come back to the bigger ones where we get the best bang for our buck, if you like, using that expression. Yeah.
So why do you think those other platforms have not provided any bang for the buck, in your words?
I guess at the end of the day, it's their marketing expertise, whatever that is. I'm really not in a position to comment on that. Yeah, it's a case of the product that they have developed and offer as to its popularity, I guess, in the marketplace.
So if I understand, it's I suppose they don't have the customers and the leads coming through their platform compared to the bigger two. Is that right?
Yeah, yes, and one can ask the question, why would that be? And I can only think it's the as I said, the product offering, the innovation that goes into it. It's that expertise and the skills that they obviously have versus the opposition. And I guess that applies to any company, really. It's what attracts the consumer that matters at the end of the day.
Certainly, and I think we've heard from a number of these platforms. Obviously, it's user interface, it's marketing, but that's not your business, and so I can't expect you to answer that for them. But we've also been told about, for instance, Gumtree. I mean, is that something you've used or thought about?
Yes, I'm not entirely familiar with Gumtree. Yes, I'm aware of them, and I'm quite sure we have used them in the past. But it's not a major one in our portfolio at all.
And we were also told yesterday about Facebook Marketplace, as well as another place that consumers may go. And I don't know what your experience has been.
I really can't comment on that. I don't know whether we have used that at all.
All right. And just then on your own platform, I mean, I assume you have a website for your group. Is that right?
Yes, we do.
And through that, you would obviously advertise your new cars as well, because that's part of your business as well. And so, can I just understand your pre-owned platform? Was that sort of an extension of your current website that you set up to list your cars?
Yes, we developed a platform of our own, and then through our principals, Mercedes-Benz South Africa, we link into their dealer platform, their agents platform, which we're all able to access, and that just gives us greater coverage in the markets.
So if I can just, understand, so this was what, to link in your stock of pre-owned vehicles, make it visible on your website and make it visible on the Mercedes-Benz website as well. Is that right?
Yes, so just as I said, it gives us greater coverage. We have, say, 140 cars being advertised at any point in time. And on a single site like ours, it would not attract the same attention as on a combined site with all dealers.
All right. So do you still provide it through to Mercedes-Benz, your 140 listing?
Yes, the Mercedes-Benz site points customers to us and other dealers, and generally it would be on a search basis. So if you're looking for a C-Class, that the site will then point you to dealers that have C-Classes on offer at any point in time.
And that would be the used cars as well, I assume.
I'm referring specifically to used cars there. Clearly they do advertise new as well.
So just understanding, when you say you discontinued, do you still? I understood you still provide those leads to Mercedes-Benz, and it's still searchable. You just don't have your own website anymore.
Yes, well, effectively we do, but we were operating in isolation, if you like. We now have this link, so the site is ongoing, it's dynamic, it changes all the time, but it's linked in to the overall dealer offering that's available.
But even with Mercedes as a big brand that I suppose can advertise their site, you're still seeing 3/4 of your leads coming through the portals.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
I mean, we also heard over the last few days that the OEMs, as they're called, the original equipment manufacturers, will advertise on Google to place their brand, direct people to their website. But I mean, from what I understand from you, that's still not drawing the kind of traffic that the portals have. I mean, I don't know if that's something you have any knowledge of.
I don't. My knowledge in this regard is pretty limited, but I kind of liken it to what the press was not many years ago, where we'd have these so-called laundry ads with dozens of cars listed, and gradually the public moved away from that to the digital platform. And as I said earlier, the move to online inquiries has just accelerated over the last year and a half. And yeah, so that's where we are at the moment. And I wonder what the future holds. I'm sure things will change yet again.
Yes, and I suppose over your 40 years, you've seen quite a lot of change. And
Indeed.
I just wanted, you had a slide on sort of ranking and customer search. I just wanted to understand, when you're on those portals, how important is it that your vehicle is ranked relatively well?
Um, I think the ranking comes from the inquiries, basically. I mean, it's generated by the inquiries. So, as I said, it is interesting when one considers our product in relation to other products and price-wise. I mean, we're in the upper end of the market, and it's fascinating to me that if one looks at C class, it's an expensive car in relation to the greater market, and yet it ranks third overall. And I think that a lot of that is aspirational more than anything else. You know, people are interested, and that's great. That awareness of the product.
We heard yesterday from both Cars.coza and Auto Trader, the two you use, and on Cars.coza, it seems the default when you search is from cheapest to most expensive. That's generally how it's listed. I mean, it seems most consumers might start, so your Mercedes-Benz C-Class may be at the expensive end, but assuming someone's searching for that, they would type in or select Mercedes-Benz, select the model, they might select a price range or whatever, and hit search, and it would come out cheapest to more expensive. So, I mean, I understand on Cars.coza you can't really influence that ranking because that's how it's ranked, cheapest to most expensive, and all you can do is, as I understood, buy a package that just allows you to stand out a little more with more pictures and the like. Do you subscribe to the package for the standout or not?
We do subscribe to a package which will give us good exposure, our name, the brand, and so on. Very definitely. I mean, because ultimately, and I'm a layman in this, but I would imagine that most inquiries that come to us are where people are specifically looking for a Mercedes-Benz. And we've got all the competition out there, also advertising their ways, so one needs to try and stand out a little.
And because it's ranked cheapest to most expensive, I mean, does that make you think carefully about your pricing with your Mercedes-Benz that you have used cars?
Yeah, you know, I think at the end of the day, we can think as hard as we like about pricing, but the market ultimately dictates what's acceptable and not, and we adjust accordingly. It's a very dynamic situation, and that's the marketplace, and it's how it should be, in my opinion.
No, certainly. I mean, with Auto Trader, we heard yesterday that there's other tools you can use though to appear at the top. You've got featured listings. You've got premium listings. You can buy sort of brand logos. I mean, do you subscribe to any of those packages to improve your visibility?
We do subscribe to the packages, but it's all relevant to the cost to us. So in our case, the amount we spend relative to the actual average value of our cars is well within our parameters. But it's cost driven as well. One has to be, in any marketing can be hugely expensive at the end of the day. So it's balanced by the cost effectiveness of it. Yeah.
And I mean, on that, I suppose we heard from at least from Auto Trader, that their costs are small relative to the margins that are made by dealerships. I mean, just to get your perspective, I mean, you're a dealer, you've got a range of other costs as well. I mean, and you just said marketing, you know, has its role and it obviously delivers leads and value for you. But, I mean, you've also spoken about the tough times you've been through. So just can you give us a sense of how you think about marketing budgets and how much you're willing to spend there and what other costs you've got to deal with as a dealer in this environment?
Yeah, the contrary to public perception, margins are not as rich as one would hope. So it's a very tight margin that most motor dealers work to. The times that we're currently living in are clearly different, and again, it's supply and demand, and so because of the shortage of product, the margins have improved to a degree. But this is the exception, and as you said, having been around for as long as I have, I've seen the best of the times and the worst of times. And so marketing is one of those expenses that is variable and can obviously has to be controlled. It is material in the overall package of costs, if you like. But marketing isn't just advertising; it's your premises and the amount of money that one spends, and just being able to occupy these premises that we do. And in this market that we're in at the moment, suppliers is obviously having a major impact on us as well. So I can't give you a precise number here, but other than to say it is a material variable expense that we control.
Yeah, and I think you've given us a good perspective, because I think it was important for us to understand, because as you say, the perception may be that margins are rich, but you have a lot of other costs, and I suppose maybe, yeah, because of the new car supply shortage and the shift to used, you maybe have a little more margin there, but would I mean, understand there's also a stock issue, because there's also only so many used Mercedes-Benzes out there that someone wants to sell, especially if they can't buy a new one. Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Roy, just on the ranking there, just to go back to Auto Trader, I mean, you said you buy into some of the packages, and I just want to ask what the purpose is of buying that. I mean, they are there for visibility and views, and that's what we're told. But do you see them as important to get those packages on Auto Trader, or they're nice to haves?
I think it's a combination of both, and I'd like to believe that we do it just in terms of the value for money more than anything else. If the package gives us that little extra exposure in the marketplace, then it's money worthwhile and investing in. We certainly try and avoid nice to haves in the main, but often a package comprises both nice to haves and those really beneficial elements. So yeah, but it's really driven by the kind of exposure that we'll get in that medium.
I just wanted to ask on some of those nice to haves. I mean, we're interested in things like the dealer branding, for instance, having your logo, and
Yep.
and that's clearly part of your promotion. I mean, was it always the case that you paid extra for that, or is that a recent development?
I think what's happened over time is as this medium, online advertising, has matured, and as technology has matured, so these so-called nice to haves have become available. I think if one just looks at any sort of TV, for example, I still marvel at just what one can get on TV. I mean, these smart TVs that give you all sorts of options, and you're able to access all sorts, and this is happening at an increased pace. So, yes, I think it's important to keep pace with them, and to have your branding now thrown into the deal is great. I mean, just is yet another way of increasing one's presence in the marketplace.
Roy, I'm just going to check with the team if there are other questions we have for you. Um, um, I've just got a few more. I suppose you've said you're dependent on two platforms. I mean, what has been your experience over time with as these have sort of matured into the two big ones? Have you found that you're spending more on them over time, and do you have any concerns that there's two big platforms that are available and not much other that's working for you at least?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think we are, as a company, it is our policy to be continuously reviewing what we're doing and try and improve on that. So we try all sorts of different means of exposing our product to the market. I can honestly say that I haven't really considered this to be a concern. It's worked well for us. And as I say, we are always, for example, that dealer platform that I referred to, we place a great deal of emphasis on that and see it. You know, the public are moving, are continuously browsing the internet, basically. And our brand being, as you saw from the stats, being as popular as it isn't only looked for on the auto traders, but certainly the Mercedes-Benz platform is a good one. And so we're forever exploring other outlets for our products. And I think during this pandemic, it's also brought to the fore what more can we do in home deliveries, for example, just as an example. So we're always exploring those things, and I don't see this as a concern. I think provided that we are flexible and fleet-footed in what we do. That's really probably a convoluted answer, but that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, but I think that makes logical sense. You're a business person. You're always looking to how to ensure that your business thrives, and you're faced occasionally with changes in situation or challenging times, and you need to respond to those.
I think, James, the important thing here is that nothing change is one of those things we have to cope with, and nothing remains the same. So I've never believed in being totally dependent on just one form, in this case, one form of advertising. I think we've got to be alive to all those opportunities and move with the times. And certainly change is the one thing that we can all be sure of.
Yes, the only certainty. I've just got one last area I just want to ask you about, which is the sort of listings software and getting your listings up onto these various sites. I mean, you did say in your slide there was an additional content management system was required to load and remove vehicles on your own site. I mean, we obviously are not dealers and operating with this daily, but do you have a single sort of software or listing engine that you load your content on and then say, all right, upload to AutoTrade or upload to cars.coza or to our own website? I mean, how does it work?
I actually am not familiar with that. We have a little department that handles this. And yes, we obviously use software to load these cars, but I'm not familiar with the process at all.
All right, and that's fine. I'm sure we'll learn more from others as well on that front. But Roy and Dennis, I do want to thank you for coming forward and participating. I know that takes time out of your day, but I think as the panel and the inquiry, we really appreciate that. You're under no obligation to come here, and the fact you've chosen to do so, I think, helps our process and helps inform us of get a better better sense of this area, at least that we're looking into. So I do thank you for that. Thank you for also responding to our survey. It's important we do hear from the users on the platform, and maybe, I mean, Dennis, you popped up on my screen now. I don't know if you have an answer to that listing software question or not. And I'm sorry we didn't give you an opportunity to speak, but welcome. But yes, I want to thank you both for coming forward, and I think that is in a good public spirit to assist an inquiry and give us better information. So I do wish you all the best with your business. I know it's challenging times. I hope you survive these times and we get back to some good times as well. But thank you, and we may at some point cross paths again. But if we do, I know we'll get your assistance. Thank you.
James, thank you very much. It's been most interesting. And just under the heading of that software and the listings, if you'd like further information, I can arrange for it to be sent to you, if that'd be at all helpful.
Yes, I think it's interesting, Roy, across all these different platform types, how people load up and how easy it is affects their choice sometimes. So it's just knowing that sort of middle software bit, what's happening. So we would certainly appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, you both. And I think next we've got Bolt scheduled for 10:45, so we may take a short break in proceedings and then resume at 10:45. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank
Goodbye.
you. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Welcome back from the break. And as I indicated earlier, we have the pleasure of Bolt Foods joining us now. And I'd like to welcome Mr. James Townsend Rose, who's the country manager, South Africa, for Bolt Foods. And James, I believe we've also got Mr. Andrew Gaznola, who's head of public policy, Southern Africa for Bolt. Ms. Vishal Jappi, who's policy and regulatory advisor to Bolt, and Mr. Abdul Wahid Patel, who's policy and regulatory advisor to Bolt as well. So welcome.
Good morning.
I believe you have a presentation for us, James, so I'm going to let you and Andrew launch that and take us through.
Great. Let's just check that you can see that.
We can. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, happy. I think we've done introductions, so we can dive straight into the presentation. And the way I want to run this is really just to, first of all, give an introduction to Bolt at large. Bolt Food sits within a greater organization. I think that context may be important for the purposes of the Q&A later. We'll then dive into Bolt Food and then look more closely at the Bolt Food in South Africa and our perspectives of online food delivery, and then some pertinent points around our relationships with restaurants, particularly around pricing and commission structures. And then we'll just finish with some concluding remarks, and then looking forward to the Q&A session after that. So let's just dive into who is Bolt. Bolt is essentially a mobility platform that was launched in 2013 in Tallinn, Estonia. For those who are not familiar to the brand, but maybe familiar to other brands, perhaps similar to the likes of Uber. Since that time, so over the last 7-8 years, we've grown to have 75 million customers. We're in 300 cities and over 45 countries. And we have a wide range of partners, so 2.5 million drivers and about 100,000 couriers across those regions. We do focus on perhaps the smaller non-traditional markets. So our focus is on mainly Central and Eastern Europe and Africa. And we've done that for a number of reasons. These tend to be the smaller markets which are harder to operate in. And so more often than not, less competitive than some of the larger markets. By focusing our investments and our expertise, we also have cross-pollination benefits between our different verticals in the business, and really build local expertise to solve some of the mobility and delivery challenges within these markets. If you look at, Andrew, if we just go on. If you look at the journey of Bolt, as I said, it started in 2013 purely with ride-hailing or e-hailing. And since then, we've diverged into multiple different verticals to a point where we now have a delivery vertical, which is around food and grocery delivery. We have a rental vertical, which is scooters, e-bikes, and car rental. And then our core business is the ride-hailing business. So we've diverged quite a lot. In South Africa, prevalence is just ride-hailing and food delivery right now. So just focusing on Bolt Food for a moment. So we're available in 20 countries and 40 cities across Europe and Africa. We obviously see some synergies with our ride-hailing customers, and that customers will use our ride-hailing services and our food services, and they might be introduced to the platform through one or the other. Bolt Food launched in 2019, 2020, so really in the height of the pandemic, and we did have to adjust very fast as a vertical to dealing with some of the constraints of the pandemic, and I had to quite quickly get into delivering other verticals as well, as restaurants were shut for large periods of time. So we have over various countries and various times delivered other products, groceries, electronics, flowers, and books. Well, our core business is very much on restaurant delivery. And once the restaurants were open again to delivery, we did veer back into focusing on restaurants. What are we trying to be? We do have ambitions within the Bolt Food vertical. We are looking to be one of the bigger players in this vertical when combined with restaurant delivery and grocery delivery in this sector. So we launched and have grown fast and continue to be keen to grow fast in the future. What is Bolt Food? I think you've heard from the other players in the market, so I don't think we need to belabor the point of what exactly Bolt Food does, because really how bulk food works is very similar to our competitors in the market, Uber Eats and Mr. D. Essentially, we're a marketplace. And Andrew, if you go on to the next slide, our role is essentially to create a platform where customers and restaurants can meet each other, and we facilitate that transaction, and all the operational complexity that goes along with it. And there is a large amount of technical and operational challenges in making sure that transaction works to the benefit of both customers and restaurants. Essentially, that the customer gets their food hot after purchasing from the platform. Bulk food is live in a number of markets, and we continue to explore others. South Africa launched in early 2020. So it was one of our first countries that we launched in, and subsequently we've launched in 3 other African markets, which we also see similarities to. So there is definitely some expertise growing in our understanding of the African market and how that equates to business in South Africa as well. You know, some of the advantages that we bring when we go into a market, essentially we already have a base of potential customers. So we do tend to move, when we go into a new country with bulk food, we go into a country where ride hailing exists already. And this brings with it obviously some benefits with an existing customer base who understand the brand and have seen value in interacting with the brand, and also allows us some cross-promotion benefits. We can move customers from one vertical to another. Technology expertise, we have a technology product HQ in various hubs around Europe. We've had to expand out of our core hub in Estonia due to some resource constraints over the last few years. But we've certainly built up some expertise in this area. That being said, if you look at our product compared to the competitors, there are still gaps in how a customer and a restaurant and a courier interacts with our product compared to the competition in this market. So whilst we have built some expertise here, it's a very competitive field, and we're relatively late to the market, so we are catching up. In addition to that, we have built over the years some operational excellence and a very capable team, both in the headquarters component in Estonia, who support the local operations team here. We're a relatively small team in South Africa. We're 22 people on the operations side, with not including customer support, and then a delivery team in HQ that support us with their expertise and support. But again, that team is relatively small as well still. Just want to show an example of that integration that I mentioned. So, you know, you may have used or seen the Bulk Rides app, and you'll see that when you raise your profile in the app, you will see the bulk food button. You'll also see bulk food promoted in the actual ride-hailing application. And this speaks to some of the value that we can bring to customers who are using our platform in the interoperability between profiles and user journeys, and the expectations from the brand, which is generally centralized around one of good value to customers. So our kind of core value proposition is really around delivering a great value to customers, whether that be on the ride-hailing or the food side in South Africa. From a journey perspective, nothing is too surprising here. Essentially, when you go onto our app, you'll see a range of restaurants in your local area, and you'll choose a meal. You'll then proceed through checkout. You can opt to pay by cash or by card, and then the clever action happens in the background, where we link your delivery up with a courier, who will then deliver your order to you, and you get insights on the journey as that courier picks up the food and delivers to you. Throughout this process, there's customer service support at any time. So if you have any queries or questions or concerns during the order or after the order, you can raise it with the customer service team. The platform for the restaurant looks a little bit different to this. They essentially see an order and accept it. They then get told when the courier is arriving, and some notifications to help with the handover process. And then they get their sort of invoicing and financing data sent through to them through a partner portal that provides them access to information and an opportunity to update and change some details to provide a better experience to the customer on the application. It is a provider-driven marketplace. So the first thing that we do when we move into a market is get restaurants on the platform. Restaurants have a lot of buying power as a result. It's a selection-driven business. So customers come onto the platform and stay on the platform when they see good selection and good price. So the way we essentially operate is when we move into a new market, we onboard restaurants first before opening up to customers to ensure that when they go onto the platform for the first time, they see adequate selection and they're enticed to use our product. Just a little bit on South Africa. If you look at the opportunity here, it's a reasonably large market within the bulk food stable. With a large population, a reasonable GDP per capita, and a relatively large e-commerce and potential food delivery market. I think the important thing here is not necessarily the size of the market, which is still very small on percentage terms of the total food and beverage economy. It's really in the rate of growth, and this has been further accelerated by COVID as restaurants became, for a short term, wholly reliant on delivery platforms, and certainly accelerated customer usage of delivery platforms. That being said, it's still a very small percentage of total volume through restaurants, and there are some headwinds. So some key constraints in our space are the development of restaurants' own deliveries. So restaurants are increasingly looking to either partner with third-party fleets or actually operate their own fleets and build their own applications, either through iOS and Android stores or online. And I've shared some examples there of KFC and Debonair's who do this. The other, obviously, constraints to further growth are competition, direct competition in the market. So these are Mr. D and Uber Eats, and we'll go into in a minute the kind of history of the food delivery industry in South Africa, which is not new. And then the last one is just supermarkets or in-home dining or in-restaurant dining. These are obviously constraints to further development. As I mentioned earlier, COVID did accelerate the adoption of food delivery platforms, and we're starting to see that growth slow down now as we trend back to sort of normal times. But it's certainly increased the market size over the last year to 18 months. Yeah, so just a little bit on the food delivery history in South Africa, and I'm sure the panel know a lot of this information, but really the two big players through time have been Mr. D and Uber Eats. Mr. D has a long history in food delivery, first of all with those pamphlets that were with a magnet that was stuck to our fridges in the sort of 90s and 2000s, and then more latterly with the takeover by Takealot and the Naspers Group, and the transition to a digital platform and an app, and then Uber Eats entering the market very aggressively in 2016, and their expansion to 7 or 8 markets within a year, 2017. There have been some other players. So Order-in was a player for a while, then pulled out. And there have also been some local or smaller players over time, which haven't necessarily gained the traction that they expected, to a point now where the 3 largest players by our estimations are Mr. D and Uber Eats, and ourselves being a very distant third still. We're only live in 2 cities, and in Joburg, which we've launched recently, we're only live in a very small part of it. So we're still relatively small to the incumbents. It is a very challenging landscape, and I'm sure we're going to discuss some of these points later in the Q&A. First of all, South Africa is an environment where there are significant economic headwinds for a large percentage of the population. What does this mean? It means that value for money becomes a central part of any value proposition for most brands, most consumer brands in South Africa. And in a low margin business like the platform delivery business, this can squeeze margins further, and it can become a little bit of a race to the bottom to gain market share. And you can see that in that all the platforms essentially are competing on price, both on menu price and offering low delivery fees. The other headwind for us is obviously our competition are very mature, both in their product, their experience, their geographical spread, the data that they've collected over the last few years and how they can use that, the restaurant selection and the relationships they have. And when customers and restaurants are making decisions around whether to engage with Bolt Food, they're obviously comparing us with these two incumbents. So that comparison is being made by a customer and a restaurant, and given our relative newness to the market and our nascency and the size of our team, it can create a headwind. There are some operational challenges in the market as well, specific to Africa and South Africa. The one I've picked out here is just cash. So our ride-hailing users predominantly are using cash, and this creates some significant challenges with growing the market in South Africa, and that there are safety and financial impacts of handling cash that put a further squeeze on the profitability of the model in the market. So this is a little bit on our history. So as I said, we launched in 2020. I actually wasn't in the seat at the time. My predecessor was, but we launched about a week before lockdown, which was terrible timing, and launched into Cape Town, into the CBD, which then really emptied during that period. The company had to pivot quite quickly into offering other products because the restaurants were shut during that level 5 lockdown period in the initial stages of COVID. So we moved to delivering groceries, pet food, health supplements, and off-the-shelf medications to relatively low effect. Customers weren't prepared during those chaotic times to try out new brands, and they were really looking to focus on things that they knew in what was quite a scary and chaotic environment. As the months progressed and the lockdown levels eased, we dropped some of the other verticals really to focus specifically on restaurant delivery only. And our aim during 2020 was really to focus on helping retailers who didn't have delivery partners to stay in business, and potentially offering those who already had a delivery partner to try someone else. We offered quite generous commissions to restaurants during that time to try out our platform. We did struggle to gain customer traction during that period. Again, I think there's a lot of reasons behind that. But last year, towards the back end of last year and the beginning of this year, we started to see more traction on the platform. I think people were emerging out of a state of shock during the year. We also had some product upgrades that allow us to show better value to customers, and the way the customers experienced our brand in the user experience on the app improved. And we also rolled out the ability to purchase by cash. And that's when we started to see a little bit more growth towards the beginning of January, February this year in Cape Town only. Essentially what we do now is we allow restaurants to deliver products in Cape Town and a small part of Joburg to deliver their food to customers via couriers. And having stayed in Cape Town for almost 1.5 years as our only market, we then expanded out of Cape Town and we launched in Joburg about 4 or 5 weeks ago. So we're still relatively sort of new, young there, and learning and understanding the market in Joburg, which is quite different to Cape Town and relatively small compared to the Cape Town volumes that we experience today. Just want to touch a little bit on our relationship with restaurants. So first of all, just to sort of show how a customer experiences the restaurant. I think our user experience, our discovery, so how a customer finds a restaurant, is still relatively rudimentary. So there's not sort of crazy algorithms behind this. It's more around just filtering and some basic rules that we can apply to different categories. But essentially, a customer goes onto our platform and can search for restaurants by a number of ways. So restaurants that are currently have a discount to offer. We also show customers restaurants who have faster delivery. We see that customers who are hungry obviously enjoy that. We expose all restaurants who are new to the platform in its own home category towards the top of the search. We also have a pickup option where you can essentially order through the platform but pick it up yourself. So we provide that option as well. And we also re-show customers restaurants that they've ordered from before. The vast majority of restaurants on the home screen are essentially in a long scroll beneath that top portion. And they're based on proximity to the eater. That's the ordering mechanism. The other ways that a customer can find a restaurant is to search. So you can see on the second button from the left at the bottom there is all search tags. So they can search either by the restaurant name or by a tag. So if you're looking for a burger, you can search by burger and it would show you all the restaurants that have been tagged for burger. So that's another way that customers find the restaurant. In terms of our relationship and as to how we price and how we enter an agreement with a restaurant, essentially each restaurant is dealt with on an individual case-by-case basis. At the moment, it's not possible for a restaurant to automatically sign up to the platform. It's still quite a manual process. Half of my team are essentially a sales team who go out and meet restaurant partners and discuss the value of the platform and negotiate essentially the terms of an agreement with the restaurant on a case-by-case basis. As I said a couple of slides ago, this is a selection-driven business, and we're competing with some incumbents who have got over 8,000 or 9,000 restaurants on the platform. So obviously what's important to us is to get more restaurants on our platform as quickly as possible. So we've really tried to make it as appealing and friction-free as possible. So startup costs for restaurants are nil. There's no fee for joining the platform. Any fees are associated against a transaction. There's no fixed fees up front. And we also want to take out the risk. We understand for restaurants that Bolt Food is a new brand, especially in the new markets that we go into. So we want to take out any kind of potential downside risks for restaurants who might be reticent to join something new, having experienced Uber Eats and Mr. D for a number of years. So we take out any penalty fees or costs associated with cancelling. If the restaurant doesn't see value on the platform, they can simply turn off the tablet and we'll come and pick it up and we're done. Restaurants are also using multiple delivery partners. I think some restaurants have issues with this. They see it as an operational headache to manage multiple tablets or multiple integrations, especially around invoicing and managing invoices and also training of staff to deal with different platforms. But we do see most of our restaurants operating across multiple platforms. We also work with restaurants who have their own delivery platform, so they just see us as an alternative to marketing channel or distribution channel against their own delivery channel as well. So there's lots of different variations with each restaurant, all negotiated on a case-by-case basis. So just to a couple of points to conclude on before we get into Q&A. From my perspective, I think food delivery is such a nascent industry still in South Africa. We've obviously got two large incumbents, but that aside, it's still developing incredibly quickly. And the rise of COVID has definitely accelerated some of the trends that we've been seeing over the last couple of years. And we've seen that in obviously all sectors, but this is just one sector that has seen it particularly highlighted. It is competitive. I think the nature of all digital marketplaces is that it becomes very competitive with many delivery platforms coexisting and some complexity there with owned delivery platforms and fleet partners offering services to restaurants as well. So it's a competitive and complex environment. And then the last one is just a point on the consumers, just to double down on that point around consumers being attracted to choice being the key differentiator. And consumers will end up going to the platform that has the best selection of restaurants at the best value. All other parts or all other differentiation factors within a platform environment will tend to normalize to each other. So the experience for the customer will be relatively similar. The way a customer searches will be similar. The delivery service will be similar. The courier partner indeed might be the same person who also multi-apps. So this is where the differentiation really happens, is on restaurants and pricing, particularly in this market. Thank you for your time. That's all I have to say on the introductory remarks, and yeah, looking forward to Q&A.
Thank you very much, James. Yeah, I think a lot of what I want to ask is your journey as the late entrant. But before I start, I just wanted to touch on a couple of things. I mean, you said that it's obviously quite a lot of tech and complexity behind what we see. We just tap, purchase and expect our food in 30, 40 minutes, but a lot happens behind that. I mean, in talking to some of the sort of national chains, I think they've highlighted that's quite a hurdle for them to get over in doing their own. It might be fine for my local butlers in Cape Town who had a good reputation in their area, but rolling out nationally seems to be a lot more challenging. And I suppose that part of doing a inquiry like this, you start to test these different products. So you'll be pleased I downloaded Bolt app, and you do deliver in my area in Johannesburg. But I've used some of the national brands. I'm not going to name them, but to be frank, the food came after more than an hour. The one time it was cold, and maybe I persisted because I know a lot more about what happens in the back. But eventually you just say, that's not the experience I want. I mean, maybe if you can just comment on that, how the platforms that invest in this tech on a global nature compared to some of the sort of chains that are doing this or trying to do it.
I think they, for a local player, they are essentially two options you can go down. There's off-the-shelf delivery technology that you can you can purchase and you can adopt, and there's probably some supporting costs associated with that. And these will tend to be developed by software houses, and they offer a basic service, and then you essentially take over the operations of that service. The second option is to invest in your own platform, and like any software development, it is a costly game. Not least of which, software developers are such a constraint globally right now. So to get a quality software development team is going to cost you a lot of money just in headcount costs. That's before you even started developing the platform. It's obviously not a once-off cost. Customers have got increasingly picky over their expectations. And so you're constantly having to reinvest in the platform to offer additional forms of payment or additional features or search functionality. The list of what you haven't done yet just grows and grows. And so I can see why, as you said, some of the local players or national chains would struggle to see value in developing their own platform. That said, I don't really know the economics of this. Setting up your own delivery service. But certainly I can see why the larger global technology businesses who have an existing pool of software engineers do have an advantage here. Purely, if nothing more, because there's just a large pool of resources from which to draw from to focus on what is essentially their core business. So I think for a restaurant chain, their core business is not software development. So there'll always be this tension between, improving our food, our menu, our in-store journey versus, do we want to invest in developing this platform, which we know very little about. So I think those are my thoughts on that matter.
Yeah, and I think you raise an interesting issue about it's not once-off, that I suppose expectations get set in the market by, also how fast it comes but all the other features. I mean, on that, I just wanted to ask about the payment options. I mean, you talked about the cash, and I know fintech is developing quite rapidly in this country at least. I mean, are there more payment options to sort of overcome the lack of credit card and extend this product into other communities where, people don't have those sort of devices, credit card type facilities? Is that something that's happening?
Yeah, I think there's additional benefits with having multiple payment options. And if you just go through any e-commerce journey in South Africa, when you get to the checkout, you'll see often 5 or 6 different options: debit, credit, instant EFT, maybe discovery or e-bucks. These are all various options. And I think it's been well shown, although I don't know the exact data, that just the more options you have, you're just going to be able to reach the needs of more people. Cash is still such a big part of the economy, but it is a challenge for us to work with. So obviously part of a software team's development into a market in maximizing conversion rates of customers on the platform is to look at ways that we can increase the types of way that you can pay, to try and bring customers out of the cash environment and into another environment that they're comfortable with.
Yeah, and sorry, that's one thing I didn't check quickly on your app, but I mean, are these making it into the delivery service area? I know they're in e-commerce, but are they making it onto your type of platform yet?
For us, it's just cards and cash right now. I wouldn't be able to speak to the competitors. Over time, I would expect that we would invest in adding other options. But our product team are working on so many other countries. For us to localize or get a local integration prioritized is very challenging. So something like Discovery Miles or e-bucks would be unlikely in the short term, but we would certainly look to it in the future.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned that you've launched in 3 other African countries. I mean, is part of the thinking there to get in early, because a late entrant obviously will go to it, but has challenges?
Yes, I mean, there's definitely advantages to being first mover. Unfortunately, in all of those markets, we're not first mover. We've actually gone into the African continent relatively late. So whatever designs we had to move into those countries, it wasn't to be the first mover. It was to expand our footprint and attempt to compete against already quite well-established incumbents.
And then maybe my last question on the technology side. I mean, you talked about the headache at the restaurant side, that some of them see it as a headache trying to deal with a few different tablets or handheld devices, as I understand. And I had asked one of the others just about the technology on point of sale integration and where we are in that. Because, I mean, what we're seeing in other platform types, not food delivery, is these sort of middle software companies can make quite a difference to how many platforms you can list on. So in travel, you have basically a booking system that drops rooms in 20, 30 platforms. So just if you could let us have insights from your side around where that is going.
Yeah, definitely tablets will come off the table over time. It's a headache for everyone. It allows us to move quite fast in that we can get the tablets and the tablet software essentially off the shelf, and we can bring restaurants onto our platform relatively quickly. But as soon as volumes reach any kind of scale, it then becomes an operational headache for them to manage. And to be honest, it has impacts on us and the courier partners and the customers as well. So our product team are somewhat focused on point of sale integration. We have a small part of our team who are executing product point of sale integrations on a prioritization basis. In South Africa, we are put against the other food countries that our product team are looking at. So right now, there's none of our restaurants in South Africa have point of sale integration, although we are in discussion with some of them. This is obviously done on a software basis, not a restaurant basis. So, for example, we would look to integrate with Pilot as an example, and then once we've integrated with Pilot software, then anyone who uses a Pilot point of sale would have an opportunity to be integrated with us. So we wouldn't go necessarily restaurant by restaurant. We would go by point of sale platform to point of sale platform based on who uses that point of sale software.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, just I'm not in the restaurant business. I mean, are there many of these different point of sales? Or, I mean, are there a couple of big ones where if you integrate, you can get quite a large chunk of restaurants?
I don't know the exact detail. I think it's 3 or 4 well known that would probably cover 80 or 90% of the market, and then a handful of others. But that is an estimation.
And I mean, often, obviously, the big national chains are going to have their systems. Would they be using these pilot or whoever, or do they have their bespoke ones?
They'd largely have their own, they'd use an off-the-shelf system, but it may have been augmented over time to suit their own needs. So similar to SAP software, you buy the core product and then you adapt it, or it is adapted for you to suit your particular needs, which may make the integration more complex.
All right, thank you for that. I think that definitely helps. So I did want to just explore, you as a later entrant and the journey you've been on. I mean, you said in your presentation it's obviously been a challenge, but I just want to sort of go back to sort of more the restaurant business. We can talk about grocery later, but as I understand from your presentation, you're not doing grocery anymore. It's just restaurant. All right. So, I mean, in entering, and it may be in Cape Town or Johannesburg, you as you indicated, customers want restaurants and choice. So I assume the beginning of this journey is partly signing up restaurants. And I would assume that, we've heard from others that South Africans like some of the big branded chains. So I assume you would have approached them as well to get them on your platform. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
And as we've heard from some of them. We heard from famous brands, and they said, well, look, we've got 2. That's what we're sticking with. I mean, maybe if you can just talk us through some of those discussions. We're not naming any brand, and we're not.
Yeah.
It's just sort of, you're in the room, or members of your team are in the room. I mean, what goes down there? How do you try persuade them to get on the platform, and what are some of the reasons that you secure some of them and not others?
Our central value proposition to restaurants is that we bring incremental customers to their platform. So we're introducing people who have not historically used, Mr. D or Uber Eats, and we're going to bring those customers through to them largely as a result of our ride-hailing, the scale of our ride-hailing customer base. So we essentially, when we go into an area, we can look to our ride-hailing customers and present food through that platform. It might have been the first time they've used food delivery, so they come onto our platform and then they they order from the restaurant. So that's the core part of our value proposition to restaurants. You rightly pointed out that what's important to us when we go into a market is to get selection on board. As we said, this is a selection-driven business. And there are 3 or 4 relationships that would cover somewhere between 30 and 50% of the total market. So that's 3 or 4 negotiations or agreements with restaurant chains, which cover a vast proportion of the total spend on platforms. These restaurant chains obviously have a lot of power in the market because of that, and I think the conversations with them over time have been largely positive. So sort of inquisitive from their side onto the additional value that we can bring. Tentative around our scale and the operational friction it would cost them to partner with someone who's still in 1 and a bit cities. You mentioned a brand called, Famous Brands, who obviously represents a number of brands beneath them. I think they have about 2,500 different locations. And for them to partner with us on, whilst we're just in Cape Town and Joburg, I can imagine would add some complexity. Their team and headquarters who manage delivery platforms is relatively small. And so for them, partnering with us while still covering a small area, could potentially be a distraction. It's not a position I'm comfortable with, and we hope to change it. But that's for us to prove to them as we expand across South Africa. And that type of approach, or that type of response from famous brands is pretty similar to the responses we've received from the other 2 or 3 really large chains, which is, we've seen you guys before, come and go. Let's kind of keep talking and we'll see how you do. And let's enter into a trial agreement. So we are starting a trial with some of the bigger names in the next kind of 4 to 6 months. And then depending on that incremental value that we say we can bring, they will then move into a wider partnership. So I totally understand and appreciate the inherence of skepticism or reluctance to partner with us while we're still relatively small. But also appreciate the conversations that we've been having with all of the bigger guys who will deliver that additional 40-50% of volume through the platform.
Thank you for that. That was actually a very useful answer to get insights. And it's interesting that I suppose you said that some of them kind of say, seen you come and go. I suppose if we're going to invest in this relationship, we want to know you're going to stick around. I suppose that's a bit of a chicken and egg situation for you. But just from your experience with many of these, they are franchise based as well. And we heard from famous brands that I suppose head office wants to control that franchise relationship as well, because almost, I think they put it, it can affect our brand. We're the custodian of the brand. And so this is a decision at head office coupled with the franchise, I think representatives, they have a national franchise council or whatever. Is that your experience of other of these big chains, that it's really a head office decision, not a franchisee decision that's left for them?
It does differ between brands. We find that the larger chains are more tightly controlled from head office. Some of the newer or smaller chains have a little bit more flexibility, disassociated down to the franchise owners. Largely, in some occasions, we've managed to trial with individual locations, even with some big brands. But as soon as the volumes start moving through that location, it gets almost raised up to head office, and then they want to take over control of the negotiation for a much wider contract. And I appreciate the opportunity and the value to deal directly with the franchisees, but I also understand why a head office wants to control the quality and the relationship from a centralized perspective. So I think it's a situation we're happy with, and we're working within that framework to good effect on most parts.
We obviously got a few global brands as well operating here in the fast food, and you're a global company as well. Are those, obviously Mr. D is a local operator, but are there these global relationships that exist? Does Mr. Bolt as a global group start to talk to a McDonald's or a KFC? Is that also happening?
Yes, it does. Yeah, we have relationships with certainly with McDonald's on a regional, if not global level. That doesn't mean that is sort of opens the door for us on a local level. So there might be an introductory agreement on a very high level between the brands, but the decision to operate with Bolt Food is very much left down to the national owners, and then indeed the franchisees. So we might have an agreement with, for example, McDonald's on a national level, but the franchisees then still have the opportunity just to say no. You know, we're already working with the other two. Yeah, so it's a relatively bottom up decision when it comes to actually pulling the trigger on the relationship.
No, thank you. That's useful to understand. I mean, Bolt obviously has a bigger brand, and you're bigger. It's not like dealing with some of the local platforms we've dealt with. So you have a bigger reputation, and as you say, you operate in many markets and can even talk to McDonald's at a global level. But I just want to ask, I mean, it's also got to come down to commission fees. And as the late entrant who's yet to prove themselves, I mean, I'm assuming you've got to kind of come in a bit cheaper as well for the national chains to make them sort of invest in that relationship.
Correct.
So, I mean, we did hear sort of with Uber Eats that if you're a Spur at 20%, you'd have to come in lower, and I suppose the same for sort of individual restaurants as well, or to the independents, it's not as much a talking point.
It's the same, you know, if the independents have got a relationship with Uber Eats or Mr. D, and our value proposition of delivering incremental business to their restaurant is not good enough, it does often come down to commissions, where we essentially have to prove ourselves for a period of time. And as you say, this often comes down to, you know, just the number, the commission number. So my estimation is the percentage at which we are lower than Uber Eats or Mr. D is probably similar, irrespective of the restaurant type. You know, we try and do this for a short period of time to essentially prove to the restaurant that we are adding value to them. And then we can, you know, renegotiate to a position that's more sustainable for us, because we are agreeing on commission percentages that are not sustainable in the long run, in order to prove ourselves to the restaurants that we bring value.
Thank you. And I mean, just on then the sort of independent restaurants, I mean, you've talked about the sort of headache of integrating, I mean, and maybe national chains want to sort of choreograph nationally, but for the independent restaurant, I mean, is this a big factor, or are they a lot more willing to just try out and have three running alongside?
I think probably more willing than the big national chains. Independent restaurants are often owner-operated, so the people you're dealing with are much closer to the frontline troops, as it were. So things like training and support and retraining. It's just a lot easier for this type of provider, this type of restaurant. And when we're dealing with a larger chain, for example, Famous Brands, they would need to train 2,500, 3,000 people, which is a huge exercise in itself, which makes that decision a lot bigger. The smaller guys just more nimble and can make the decision and put the tablet on and give it a go for a month or two.
I mean, just on that training, would just understanding the balance of who trains whom, I assume you've got to at least go into a restaurant and show how Bolt works and the interface. So would you be training, or is the restaurant training, and just also the chains, just to understand? Sorry.
Yeah, it's a good question. So during the onboarding process, so once the restaurants agree to come onto the platform, our operations team essentially reaches out to the restaurant owner and offers one of two things: either a remote training session, essentially we have a Zoom call and go through the tablet online and show them how it works, or an in-person training session where we'll actually come to the restaurant. Obviously, our preference is for the remote session because we can get in a lot more training sessions in a day than driving around the city. Restaurants tend to have a very high turnover of frontline staff, And so often the retraining is done by the restaurant themselves. So we'll do the initial training up front, but within a matter of weeks or months, you've got new people operating the system. And that's where either the restaurant will do retraining, or if we see some of the performance metrics drop, we will offer to, again, do more remote training or come in and retrain the new team.
And the national chains, I mean, I think some of them probably have dedicated training mornings, and as I would understand, so would that be sort of choreographed through you at a big Zoom event, so 200 restaurants or whatever it is?
Exactly. We had one recently. We probably had 100 people on a Zoom call, option for Q&A. And then there's also the train the trainer. So as you rightly pointed out, a big chain will have someone who's responsible for training or operational expertise or performance. And they would take on the responsibility to make sure that our training material is well shared and communicated with the franchises or the owned restaurants.
And I suppose luckily COVID has also meant that people are more happy to do Zoom calls than they were before.
Yes, yeah, it's advantageous for us, for sure.
In offering the sort of lower commissions, as you said initially, I mean, what's your experience on the sort of pricing of the menu that the restaurants you bring on board? Do they price cheaper on Bolt because there's lower commissions, or do they price the same?
We tend to see, price parity between platforms. But to be honest, it's not something that we track or measure. We just don't have the sort of the technology or the resources to see or track changes in menu pricing and compare that with competition. But if you ask me to say one side or the other, I would say it's near enough it's going to be the same as the competition.
All right. And do you have, contractual terms at least ensure you're not worse?
We do have a price parity clause in the contract. It's not something that we enforce, but certainly appreciate that they might be being self-enforced. And I think certainly in the engagement with the Commission during this process, it's something that we need to relook at. Given some of the conversations that we've heard with yourselves and others. So that's something we will be doing. But yeah, right now there is a price parity clause that essentially restrains the restaurant from offering a cheaper price on other platforms.
But I suppose, I may suppose that while your commission is lower, at least there may be even less need for that because there's less reason to even do it.
For sure, yeah. I think if there was going to be a cheaper, price platform, it would be us because our commissions will tend to be lower.
Yeah, thanks, James. Then it's I suppose the other thing you get in place before you launch are the drivers. Now,
correct,
you've
yeah.
obviously got the ride-hailing crew, but those are cars, which is not always the most efficient for food delivery. But you've got, I suppose, people experienced with Bolt. And you've also got a fair number of drivers that are contracted to Uber Eats and Mr. D. I think we heard from both of them. Uber Eats has no full employment. They're just, driver partners, as they call it. And it seemed Mr. D has some full employment, but the majority are contracted drivers. So as a late entrant, do you tap into this, or do you try build some of your own unique relationships with some of the Bolt drivers?
Certainly in an effort to move fast, we tap in largely into the existing pool of courier partners. Our model is very similar to Uber Eats, and that means that their pool of drivers is essentially the same pool of courier partners that we would want to attract. So as a result, the same driver is likely to be driving for multiple partners. This is an area where we're still relatively new for us, and I think we might develop more akin to a Mr. D approach with a combination of employed drivers and driver partners in the future. This is all still to be explored, over the next year or two. But in effort to move fast, we really bring in courier partners on board as contractors, and in a similar way to Uber Eats, and as a result, a lot of them are working for other platforms as well.
And do you offer any training as well? I mean, you obviously tap in to move fast, but do you also contribute to the training side?
Yeah, so we offer training and testing and performance management and communication. We also offer a bulk food bag and some uniform, although not all couriers take up that because they've already got some from other partners.
Yeah, I've seen that where you've ordered from one platform and then someone arrives with a box from another platform. It's interesting, but
Yeah.
I mean, as the new kid on the block, much like persuading restaurants, I mean, do you have to sort of persuade drivers much that you're going to bring them volume and it's worth sort of keeping that app open while they're out on shift?
Yes, definitely. We found that when we launched in Cape Town beginning of last year, and we're finding that now in Johannesburg, where we onboarded couriers, and certainly at the start of the launch, the volumes are relatively low. And so, some couriers will only come online for a little bit, and if they don't see an order coming through soon, they might drop off. And these are almost like the early stages of a marketplace where there's not enough liquidity, there are not enough orders, and there are not enough couriers, and they can be quite high friction in the marketplace. Some of the service quality might be lower than we want. So really, what we look forward to in that phase is to try and get out of it as quickly as possible by driving volume, through the market. So restaurants are happier, couriers are happier, and that's what we do. So for a short period of time, couriers might be less satisfied with the platform, but then over time, as the orders increase, they become increasingly sticky, and we find we get a sort of core base of couriers who are obviously using the Bolt app as their primary app. They become almost our sort of core base of courier partners. And then we have a smaller number who kind of come in and out and are obviously still deciding which way to go between us and other platforms.
And maybe for the benefit of the public and ourselves who are not drivers, I mean, how does that work? Do I have multiple apps open and I get a sort of notification there's a delivery in your area, close to where you're located, press to accept that order or not? Is that how it sort of works?
Yeah, you're ready to be a driver. You've absolutely nailed it. Yeah,
I've also got a scooter, by the way, so
you're ready to go. We'll send the bag. Driver will have a driver app that's specific to drivers. Each of our partners will have one of those. The driver can keep all of those apps open all the time. And essentially there'd be a push notification through the app to say that there's an order for pickup, and that courier has the opportunity to accept that order or not. To be honest, actually, for the Mr. D, it might be slightly different if they, they're employees rather than courier partners or contractors. But certainly that's the approach that we adopt through our setup. And then the driver will just be instructed where to go to pick up the food, and then told where to go to drop off the food to the customer.
And I mean, just last question on drivers. I mean, do you find as a sort of later entrant, drivers see a notification from Bolt and think maybe let me wait for Uber Eats, or people quite happy to just take what comes first?
It is a price-sensitive environment as well. The value proposition here is almost entirely around price, plus some ancillary benefits that we offer. So, for example, we also offer our couriers insurance while they're using Bolt food. But really that decision, as we understand it, is made in the moment about what will Bolt food offer me to accept this order versus the order I might get in a few minutes on other platforms. And this will vary from day to day, week to week, and during the month as different multipliers or surge pricing come into effect. So we are definitely competing for couriers, but we haven't seen this to be a constraint on our growth to date. My expectation in the market is that over the next few years, there may well be a significant shortage of couriers, in which case this area might become more competitive. And we'll probably see some evolution in the relationships between couriers and platforms in the future as that constraint takes effect.
Or I think that I mean that's helpful for me to understand, because I suppose what you're also saying is not a set fee per delivery. It's based on then probably distance,
Correct.
and you might have a different fee to Uber Eats, and your order might be at a different distance. So
Correct. Yeah.
And sorry, I just one last question on that. I mean, it may be that at popular sort of delivery restaurants, I mean, you can often see a load of drivers parked outside. I mean, would they also expect that maybe they may get multiple orders from one little food court, that they could then sort of get a few deliveries at the same time, and that may be more likely on one of the leading platforms? I mean, is that something that plays into the delivery choice?
I mean, yeah, certainly in positioning, couriers are pretty smart, and they know where the orders are going to come from. So once they've finished an order, they will go and sit next to, the big chains or the big stores where the volume's coming from. The apps will tend to offer the delivery to the courier that's the closest. So it's obviously beneficial for them to hang around these hubs. Different apps have different approaches to multiple or batch deliveries. Right now, Bolt Food doesn't do batch deliveries, so we don't allow couriers to pick up multiple orders to deliver to multiple customers. We feel that has a negative effect on quality of the end product, because the courier is essentially making a longer journey for the second or perhaps even the third delivery. Some of our competitors do multiple or batching deliveries. And that's certainly taken into account when the courier is accepting the order. So from our understanding, from our workshops with couriers, they will potentially not take a Bolt Food order because they will wait for a batched order from one of our competitors because it's going to give them more money. And we totally respect that. That's the courier's choice to make. But we feel as a business that we should be prioritizing quality. So we don't do the batching, even if it meant that courier would adopt Bolt Food over the competition.
No, thank you for that. I think then obviously you're ready to launch, and now it's just the customer. So it's marketing to the customer and attracting them to Bolt Foods. And I appreciate last year you kind of, I suppose, I mean, when you started in Cape Town, it was a bit more low key, as you said. It may be one of those case studies for the business schools around launching in a pandemic, that you can write up in your retirement. But was the initial just sort of settling down in South Africa, getting the technology working, the drivers working, just making sure it's sort of you had a product that sort of worked for the consumer before you go big?
Yes, there's definitely some initial testing when we launched, and again, I wasn't in the business at the time, so this is sort of almost secondhand information. But definitely during that first kind of 9 months, there's obviously some testing. There's also further product feature rollout. So as I understand it, we launched with a very rudimentary product that, for example, didn't include the cash option as a payment feature, which is a reasonably high proportion of our total payments. So that would have obviously reduced growth as well. I think we also had some internal challenges around the way the team was structured and the kind of team development over that time. And just looking back to last year, it was just a crazy time anyway. I think customers were just reluctant to change. There was enough going on. People were keener to stick to what they knew and not try new things. And very hard for a new brand to break out into the news cycle during that period as well. It's hard to remember now, but we were just consumed by COVID at the time. There was high uncertainty. So for a new business to come in and make a splash was incredibly hard. And I think the initial growth of the business suffered from that as well.
But now, I suppose 2020 we've settled in a little bit. I mean, obviously, a feature we've seen in this market is maybe the consumer addiction to promos. And I suppose it's a bit like other retail, promo pricing is a tool that's used to bring consumers in. And once you've got them in, maybe they order a bigger basket, or they order from you tomorrow without a promo. So it's a kind of a driver. I mean, is that how this sort of industry works, even globally or in other areas, other countries?
Yes, I think where the product is relatively similar. So let's assume, although it's not the case today, let's assume that all the platforms have the same selection of restaurants. In our case, in food delivery, e-commerce might be the same selection of products, and the product experience is essentially the same. You pick a product, you check out, you pay, and it gets delivered. There are very few areas left to compete, and especially in a market like South Africa, which is so price sensitive. The value proposition to the customer becomes one on price. And I think when you are new to a market with incumbents who've been around for a while, that price differential between yourself and the competition is going to have to be exaggerated to get customers to move from what they know to something new and try something different. I don't think that's unique to platforms in general. But it's certainly something that we found in our growth in Cape Town towards the beginning of last year, that once we started showing more value to customers on the platform, we started to see increased traction and customers moving from other platforms to us, or trying us out, or trying food delivery for the first time on Bolt Food.
I mean, have you found that because you also don't have some of the big chains, franchise chains, that it's also, you've got to be a little more exaggerated, because consumers may go into your app and see, I mean, I think I see you've got a Nando's and you've got a if I recall from looking yesterday, and maybe a Pizza Hut, but you don't have McDonald's on at the moment. So is it, you got to be even more exaggerated for that reason?
Hard to say definitively, just because we don't have the A/B testing opportunity to try. But intuitively, yes. We would essentially, my sense on how any marketplace would work is, if your selection is not the same, which you pointed out, it's not quite there yet. Then you essentially are having to discount more than you otherwise might if the selection was comparable.
And certainly, from what I've seen, that's kind of what you've done. I mean, I see in my area, I'm kind of in the 40% off most things. And as I understand, that's also been a bit of your strategy in Cape Town as well. Is that right?
Yes. So, weekly campaigns showing that value to customers. Exactly. I think if, as you said, you're in Joburg. So again, as we launch into a new area, we also show more value to customers as we go somewhere new to kind of introduce the brand to that area as well.
And I'd assume you get some response from the sort of other two big platforms. But maybe let me ask you that, because they've also got the national chain. So if people want those, they don't have to discount that. The customer's going to still come to them. I mean, how have you seen the sort of reaction?
It's actually very hard to accurately measure quantitatively the offer on other platforms. So we try and understand how the different players are operating in the market and the kind of value proposition, and we think we've seen some reaction from the other players. To be honest, we're still so small that I'm just pleased that they even know about us at the moment. So any reaction will, I think, still probably be quite small and maybe governed by other forces other than what Bolt Food is doing.
I mean, what we have, I suppose, heard from Cape Town is maybe that there's been collateral damage on the more localized platforms that are caught in the sort of price war. You know, I think one said to us, you know, they're closing shop after more than 10 years, just because they just can't compete anymore. I know that may be part of business, but I suppose that is going to be what happens when we have deep discounting.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to hear that. I think, you know, obviously we talked about earlier the sort of the race to the bottom in a value-driven business, you know, which is in a highly competitive environment. There's obviously a risk that this happens. You know, we picked up some of the inherent costs of operating a platform as well, and I think that's, you know, yes, the pricing is important, but the cost of building and maintaining a competitive offering in technology is just incredibly hard for a localized player. So, you know, I understand that the pricing may have had a factor, but, you know, there's significant other costs in running a local business that I'm sure was also a challenge. So yeah, it's not an ideal result.
Yeah, and that's why I mean, I just as you said that, maybe just want to explore that with you, because, you know, obviously we have a mandate to look that can we keep this, you know, open for local players as well, also as a South African mandate for historically disadvantaged groups. And we've heard, and we will hear further on Monday about, you know, from 2 other local platforms. But I just want to understand, I mean, is it sort of inevitable that it's going to be a big platform game, that there were opportunities in the early days, but once you get a sort of the bigger platforms entering and flexing their funding muscle and even, you know, entering a price war with each other, that really this is where we end up? I mean, do you think that's the case, or there is a space for others?
I think it's hard to, you know, forecast for food delivery. I think I'd be drawn to looking at in a platform industry that's just a bit older for what the future holds for food delivery. And e-commerce for me is the obvious one, you know, having started maybe 7 to 10 years prior to food delivery. So, you know, you saw a lot of people entering into the e-commerce space, international, global, and local, some big local players, not so much in South Africa. And then over time, perhaps the last 10 years, you've just seen mergers and acquisitions, amalgamations and closures, to a point where you've now got in each country maybe 1 or 2 really big players who deliver, you know, the majority of the product on e-commerce. You know, yeah, probably 2 max. And then the niche players, of which there are many in e-commerce, have just gone a different way. So they've gone to more curation, more specified around a particular customer cohort. They're focused on branding. They're focused on building a closer relationship with the customer. So if you perhaps were to apply that to food delivery, what does 10 years time look like in South Africa? It's probably you know, a couple of big platforms, maybe 3, who are, you know, doing the broad play, you know, every restaurant, every cuisine type, every payment option, you know, big tech teams, you know, etc. And then a whole bunch of others who are catering to a different niche market, and, you know, with lower upfront costs, lower technology costs, but much closer relationships with customers, and you know, perhaps a niche product type or own produced products. So, you know, cooking your own food and delivering it through a platform. I think one of the drivers here is going to be the cost of off-the-shelf technology over time. So at the moment, I think it's still quite high. So to set up your own delivery platform is expensive. But over time, perhaps that comes down. And then these, you know, let's say, for example, Shopify. You know, Shopify came into the e-commerce market and made it very cheap to run your own e-commerce store. If something like Shopify comes into the delivery play, then again, it makes it much more accessible for smaller niche players to be able to address this opportunity in a way that suits a particular customer need.
No, thank you, and I appreciate, you know, your sort of honesty and perspective. I mean, just on this niche, I mean, you're right. I kind of have, through these hearings, got a sense that that what has survived, I mean, just take e-commerce is sort of, those that have managed to survive one day only, they're quite different. It's a daily deal, changes every day. There's a limited number of products. And then we've got bid or buy. You have the auction as well. And there seems to be some niches there. And we also obviously had Yuppie Chef for a while. They've been sold, but specialist in a particular vertical. I mean, what we've seen, I suppose, in delivery is almost differentiation by location more at the moment. So we've come across quite a large number of almost township-based delivery companies, and they've obviously managed to develop because they're not competing head-to-head. You or Uber Eats or Mr. D are not in their area. So there's more scope, but I suppose their concern is as soon as those markets are developed, that they may attract the attention of the bigger platforms, and we've seen that starting to happen in the township economies, and they may be pushed out. So I'm just wondering, are there many niches in food? When you've got all the cuisines and you don't necessarily, but all the restaurants and all the options.
I actually don't know the answer. I don't know if we know. I don't think the market has possibly developed enough to know where those niches are yet. And I think that my hypothesis would be that the customer is always going to buy value, and that might be price, it might be selection, it might be the way they buy, like bid and buy, and and one day only. But wherever the customer perceives value, that's where they will go. So, if those township delivery companies come under pressure from, someone moving into their market who offers, a generic range of food and a sort of generic operation, and they understand the market, I'm sure there's opportunities in there to develop something different. I couldn't hazard a guess exactly what it is from this standpoint, but I would have thought there would be.
Yeah, and I think that's what we've got to sort of explore as the whole process of the inquiry unfolds. I mean, I think, the niche one is interesting because you're not going to necessarily have the volumes, and so it may become less efficient. And I think what we're also hearing a lot is about marketing and visibility. Obviously, for national platforms, well, let me ask you. I mean, what are the important marketing channels? Obviously, there's promos, and I can see that. You can send me direct messages because you've got ride hailing, and you maybe have a customer database that you can tap into. But in delivery, do the Google and Facebooks of the world play still an important role?
We actually invest most of our marketing spend into delivering value direct to customers. So that's our kind of core business standpoint on marketing. So actually our digital and above the line marketing spend is relatively small. I think Facebook is probably where we do spend a little bit. Nothing on Google. There's no YouTube ads, and obviously our customer base that exists through our current food base and ride hailing is an obvious place where we would market the services to. But relatively small right now. I think if you go onto our Instagram or Facebook page, you'd see that.
Because I suppose with delivery, it's really the app. You want people to download the app on their phone, and once it's there, and you hopefully the promos drive them to actually use it and just raise awareness of the promos through sending them marketing messages. That
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, because we heard yesterday with sort of autos and that it's an infrequent product, so it doesn't mean necessarily that app usage is as high as obviously food delivery.
Yeah, yes, I can understand that.
I suppose, what has concerned us with this trajectory, and that's why I just want to have an open discussion with you, is I suppose that, I'm sure you've heard our interactions with the others, but there could be a few consequences of this. I mean, the one is that it is an industry practice to differentiate the commissions. So we've got, much lower for chains versus independents. And I suppose I have a sense with this, but I may be wrong, that obviously you've got to keep the consumer with deals, and you've got free delivery, I notice now, and I mean, you accept that this has got to change. Your commissions that you've come in with are not sustainable. So we end up with sort of rising commissions and almost the business side's funding the consumer side a bit because the consumer's addicted to deals. And so that balance as well between the two, it may be inevitable part of the platform, but I think those are some of the sort of concerns that we have, especially if we run out of options in terms of delivery. So I don't know if you've got you may have a view on that, but I'd more wanted to ask you about sort of, where do we go with those concerns, if anywhere, to be honest. So let me just leave it to you if you want to say something on that.
I think the concerns are valid, and the future uncertain in this space. As we've talked about, it's highly competitive, and there is pricing pressure downwards on the customer value proposition side to customers, and then upwards on commissions to restaurants to essentially cover the cost of the value that you're offering to customers. On the courier delivery side, it's perhaps slightly less pressure there. And how this plays out in the competitive market from here over the next couple of years is largely uncertain. A couple of potential outcomes. We might get restaurants just getting increasingly dissatisfied with the offering that they get. It becomes unsustainable economically for them to partner with one or any platform. So you see restaurants either dropping off delivery platforms entirely or exploring other options to own delivery. Or we see as a result of that trend that platforms start passing on more costs to customers. And customers start to pay more for the cost of the real cost of the delivery, which puts downward pressure on commissions on restaurants. I think, my sense is it's going to sway a little bit over time. And if you think about a liquid marketplace in supply-demand scenario, we've got this three-sided marketplace, and it's constantly going to be moving between the three. And as it moves out of an equilibrium, there's always going to be some friction with one party. But as it scales and gets bigger, that center point should get, or the movement around the center point should get smaller, and we should find a place, within the platform players where there's a sort of agreeable equilibrium. And if there doesn't, then there's a problem with the whole economic model. And I don't think any type of intervention is probably going to change that. It's going to be a case of this over the next few years. This we find that equilibrium, or we don't.
No, thank you. Thank you, James. I mean, I do appreciate that you're engaging with us. I think there was a bit of reluctance from others to really engage, but I think it really helps our process to understand this a lot better, because we also don't want to go in and blunder around and mess everything up too much. Just before I explored some sort of that equilibrium, as you put it, I mean, do you have experience from more mature markets in the Bolt group, or is it all quite early days still? I think you said you launched in 2019. Was that globally?
Yes. So the first, we launched the vertical in 2019. The first delivery platforms went live in early 2020. So still very new.
So we're privileged to be one of your first markets then.
Yes, I think South Africa was in the first wave.
Great. So I think you saw, I mean, we raised, so I just want to explore what we're seeing happening in other parts of the world. And you're a platform owner, and I just wanted to understand how this plays out, you know. So I think I'd raised with Mr. D that we had seen New York City contemplating a commission cap, that San Francisco's done the same. I don't think Bolt's operating in any of those. But, you know, the thing whenever you do an intervention is you don't know necessarily how that plays out. So I just wanted to ask you, as someone who operates, you know, if you are in those situations and you're slapped with a cap of, I think they're in 15% or it may be 20%, but so there's a maximum. I mean, how does that sort of change your model in a way?
Yeah. I mean, I think if you just think about this as a three-sided marketplace, if your income from one side was constrained, you'd have to adjust your income or costs from other sides of the marketplace. So if there was a cap, hypothetically speaking, you would have to, again, hypothetically look to reduce your courier costs or to reduce your discounts or increase your cost to customer. So this might be passing on in additional delivery fees or service fees to customers and reducing discounts. And I think that's where, you know, you'd obviously now interfering with this liquid model or marketplace, you then over a period of time would understand with this intervention, would the marketplace operate or could it operate? And this might be on a provider to provider level based on, you know, the cuisine type or the size of order or the average delivery distance, which has some impact on the variable costings. And then there would have to be a decision by the either of the remaining parties, the couriers, the customers, or the platform, to operate in a market under that constraint. So if costs are passed on to the customer, they might just leave because actually now makes more sense for them to go and pick up the food or eat in. You know, they liked getting their food delivered, but not that much. If you reduce the fees paid to couriers, well, actually, I might go and get another job. I've got lots of job opportunities, or I've got another opportunity, then I'll actually go. And the platform might also say, well, at this commission cap, it's not really financially viable for us right now, based on that commission cap, so we need to pull out of the market or change our structure in another way. So those are just some of the ways I think that a business or a platform owner would think about it if that constraint was put on the platform.
No, thank you. I think that makes sense. I mean, the courier side, I mean, as I sort of understand, that's going to be the hardest to change. I mean, there's real costs there, and already it's fairly competitive. So I assume, in South Africa there's a high unemployment rate. I assume we're probably relatively cheap there, and there may be less scope. So probably the customers would have to bear more of this than play with courier.
So.
I'm just thinking it through.
Yeah, I would have thought that'd be the case. Yeah.
I just want to understand then also from the customer perspective, because I mean what we're also hearing is that restaurants are more and more likely to pass through on higher menu prices. So I'm just wondering whether the customers necessarily that much worse off with a model like this, just in the sense of there may be higher commission fees, higher menu prices. I kind of get promos, but when I'm not on a promo, I'm kind of paying higher, and it's a promo offer, higher menu price. With lower commissions, may there also be less incentive for restaurants to push up the menu prices as much. So the overall deal, as you say, I mean, you can look at income from different sources, but the overall deal doesn't necessarily change that much. I don't know, get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that's those are the levers at play. It's hard to sort of know what that would look like without actually thinking about exactly what the commission cap would be. What is the average inflation or menu inflation to a customer And then, what would that mean based on that cap and that commission, and the menu inflation, what that would mean for a customer. So I think it's hard to sort of speculate without having the details there. I think inherently, if the customer did end up paying more, and I know we're discussing would they end up paying more? Maybe they'll actually end up paying the same or less. But if they did end up paying more, I just think we'd see a move away from platform delivery as a service towards just other forms of eating. So more supermarket shopping, more in-restaurant dining, and more, maybe pickup. So using platforms as a marketing channel and more pickup services, which is obviously a slightly different model.
No, thank you. The other, I suppose, challenge for some of the entrants, even like yourself, has been signing up the national chains. Now, we talked earlier about point of sale integration. Do you think that's going to solve that issue, or national chains are still going to say, look, I still want to really have only a few partners in the game?
I think it's a requirement, but I don't think it solves the core issue, which is one of how much additional value do we bring to big chains who are already partnering with platform delivery companies. So if we were to go live with one of the bigger players, we would have to spend software development time to integrate the point of sale as a principle. It would just be one of the conditions of the contract. But I don't think that's the core blocker to partnership right now. They're rather looking for greater geographical coverage, and I think just tenure. They want to see us around for a bit, to know that we're not going to be one of the other players that have come into the market over the last 5 or 6 years. To be honest, which I don't actually have a lot of experiences. This is what we've been told, who have they've explored in the early days and then partnered with for a bit and then dropped off the radar to some cost.
Thanks. And I'm just exploring ideas here. So, as I said, who knows where we'll end up. It's been a very interesting public hearing journey, I must confess. We've learned a huge amount. So apart from a sort of cap, what if there was a sort of prohibition of discrimination? So this might be, look, you can't charge small restaurants more than large, but we're not capping your actual fee. How do you see that playing out?
It's an interesting one. I think, to make that model economically viable for a platform, it would probably mean that the commissions, if everyone had to be charged the same commissions, the commissions that were charged to international chains, the big guys, would be higher than they're currently paying. And then there'd be some, the smaller guys would probably be paying a little bit lower than they're paying. I think what this might well end up leading to is the larger guys probably dropping delivery platforms. Their margins are, the big players are high volume, low margin industries. And so, each percentage point on commission they're very sensitive to. They also are more likely to have the big software teams, the technology expertise, and the operational expertise to manage a delivery service at scale. So what I think we'd probably see is, the smaller guys who don't have that scale and expertise, sticking with the delivery platforms, albeit on a reduced commission. The bigger players migrating to operate their own delivery platforms. And then because the delivery platforms would lose the draw and the customer footprint that the big players have, potentially delivery platforms becoming unviable as a result, because their selection is now not necessarily where the majority of customers want to shop. They'd be going on to, McDonald's app or KFC app or, Famous Brands app to order their own food.
I just wanted to explore that. As obviously a commission cap is different because you cut the revenue sources, which might mean you also have to cut some of your costs, like marketing. But without an actual cap, I mean, a big part of this game is huge marketing to draw customers. And once you've got customers, they want choice, they want the selection. And we hear from the national chains, to be honest, and I know some of your larger rivals don't like to hear it, but they kind of say, yeah, we are dependent because they have the customers. If the customer's on their app ordering and we're not there, we're not part of the decision. So if you're still able to market and that cost is covered by a slightly higher commission, I mean, is this still not a viable and still not, still going to leave the big chains saying, well, we've got to be there? I mean, that's maybe my thought, but let me have your response.
Yeah, I think it's such a hypothetical play, and it would really test some of the economics of the various models. I think to really understand that, you need to have a deep understanding of the way that the big chains think about delivery and the underlying economics. Their agreeable commission window, essentially. We as platforms have obviously negotiated a position with the bigger chains, but what was the window of that negotiation? Are we towards the bottom end or the top end? If we go higher, is it viable for them? If we go lower, obviously it benefits them, but it's less viable for us. And I think without understanding that, it'd be very hard to be able to put into, or to change the model in a way that one was certain around the outcome. So if you said, look, okay, everyone in the market's got to be on 22%, that's it. Now, if that was totally outside of the negotiate or the possible area of agreement with an international chain or the big guys, I think they would obviously have to either change the way they think about their underlying economics, or change their model, or think of other things like developing their own platform. But I think without that data, it's largely a hypothetical.
I mean, would it, just to go back to our earlier discussion about the cap, I mean, would it also, let's say it's outside that window. So I don't know what that window is, but let's say 20% is their maximum. I mean, would it also not make you have to start to say, well, if I'm going to keep them on the platform, I've also got to shift a little bit then to the consumer. So I maybe charge a little more for delivery to keep us all in the 20% game, so to speak.
Yeah. I think the economics of the marketplace then still apply, where if you can't get the income from one side, you've got to shift costs or gain income from other sides to maintain a liquid platform.
And then, as I said, just exploring diverse things, but I suppose for some of the local platforms, it's just the ability to keep up with the marketing spend. If one looked at some sort of cap on marketing, how does that play out for a Bolt and others?
I'm obviously not sitting in your shoes, but I think that would be very hard to measure or to manage. So I'm not sure. I'm not even sure. I guess there's obviously various different types of marketing. There's above the line, below the line. There's digital. There's social. There's videos. There's in-app values and discounts. There's emails to customer bases. How would one even begin to think about measuring or managing the measurements or measuring the management of that approach? I wouldn't know where to start.
Yeah, I suppose that an alternative maybe is we often in competition law think about predation being unprofitable. We know that many platforms maybe need to fund in order to kind of get the economics going, but there's also a limit to sort of how long that goes on. And it's potentially the deep pockets, as we've seen in globally from venture capitalists that can fund it for a long time, that maybe has that sort of effect on all that collateral damage, as I mentioned earlier. I mean, there may be a profitability test, in which case, that may be another way of thinking about it. As a soccer fan, we know there's financial fair play in FIFA, and those sort of rules have also been brought in. But maybe let me put that to you, and in thinking about it, also put that obviously you're trying to get traction in the market, and that's your strategy at the moment. So it could impact that. But think about it maybe in response about for a large incumbent versus a new entrant, or in a flexible way. Let me get your thoughts. And I know I'm throwing curveballs after curveballs.
No,
so
I
you
like
may
it.
want to think.
I enjoy a hypothetical spitballing session. I think I would look to examples of where something like this has worked before. And again, your experience is in this field and not mine. So have there been interventions in this type of space where a marketing cap is limited to even a playing field? I think a lot of the marketing spend in both us and our competitors is really around price to customers or value to customers. And so if you include that in marketing spend capping, essentially we end up raising pricing to customers, and there's a second order effect, is now customers are paying more for food. And that's obviously a key stakeholder in the platform game as well. So potentially restaurants benefit if there's some other effect on commission structures. But now, those customers who also work in the restaurants and are important stakeholders end up paying more for food. Yeah. So, but going back to my original point, I know very little about what that is kind of effect of that type of approach would be, and I would just look to examples globally where this type of intervention has been done, and has it worked, and what are the second order effects that are hard to fathom, before doing it.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, that's what's interesting to me is, you say it's unsustainable, the current. If you're making losses, and others, so at some point, the market's got to come to some sort of break-even point. I assume your shareholders don't have unlimited money to fund consumers for forever, and I think the others may feel the same. So, if it was more of a financial fair play, so to speak, yes, the customers would lose the short-term discounting as you fight with each other, but we're all going to have to get there at some point anyway. And does it shape who's left in the market when we get there?
Yeah. I think your point around sustainability is interesting, and we're going way out of food delivery in South Africa here. But if you think about the business's responsibilities, return value to shareholders, over the last 20 years, businesses have returned significant value to shareholders without being sustainable in inverted commas or profitable. And that's really the big change in the macro environment over the last 20 years in digital platforms and digital businesses. And that continues to be the case today with the big market leader, not necessarily in South Africa in this space, but globally in Uber's case, who haven't returned a profit in the 10 plus years of doing business, but their share price continues to be sustained at a very high level and hold a high valuation. So I don't think it's immediately obvious that platforms globally are driving hard, or that the end game is profitability. And I know that's very hard to fathom or to conceptualize for a lot of people, a lot of businessmen, but this is the environment that we operate in today. My sense is, the people who are investing in this space are looking for, global returns. And so if we had too much intervention in this type of environment that stifled the opportunity for growth over sustainability, one of the effects might be that we start to lose investment into the space in South Africa. And I think if you look at the value flow, so the cash flow from, on a global level, my sense would be that the bigger platforms in South Africa have been value creators in the market in South Africa, whether that be cheaper food to customers, whether that be more orders to restaurants, with platforms covering the cost of discounts, whether that be, paying for couriers. Essentially, that the losses that the platforms make in the early stages of growth are foreign invested capital that then gets redistributed into the markets in which we operate locally. I understand that there's some other effects of that, but there's certainly some benefit to platforms coming into the country in that way. And one of the risks, and again hypothetical, but we're talking hypotheticals here, is that too much intervention just means that these type of investments aren't made, and we stop seeing those capital inflows from the bigger companies into the market. Obviously, the counter to that is, okay, in the absence of those bigger platforms, there's then an opportunity for local players to perhaps compete on a more even playing field, and that's where I guess is the job to balance up the various pros and cons of those two potential scenarios, and I appreciate the difficult types of decision to make.
No, very difficult, and that's why I appreciate your engagement, that at least then we can understand, from someone who runs a platform, how they might think about it and respond as well, I suppose we're getting too far away from food delivery in South Africa to discuss the kind of shareholders and why shareholders pour into Uber Eats or Uber globally. But let me just check with the team if there's any more questions from them. I think I'm basically done. I just want to check my notes quickly, sorry. Yeah, I think, James, thank you very much, and Andrew and your team. I don't have any more questions, and nor does the technical team or my fellow panel members. So I do really want to thank you for an honest engagement and for engaging on hypotheticals. I think it made the session really valuable for us to understand, and also to understand the journey of a late entrant and the challenges they face in doing that. And I'm sure all of the users of Bolt Food will appreciate the foreign investment to subsidize their meals in the evening. But I wish you all the best in your launch and your expansion, and I'm sure we'll engage in more hypotheticals over the next year as we have to tackle these very difficult questions.
Yeah, thanks, James. And as we said before, really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this commission and the process. We've really enjoyed the way that it's been done, and also enjoyed the hypotheticals that we played around with today. So appreciate it, and thanks very much.
Thank you. And with that, we just close this morning's session, and just to remind the public at least that this afternoon we've got first Avis to look at car rental platforms, eDreams for flight platforms, Intercape for bus platforms, and then Savrala, which is the Vehicle Rental Association, also for rental platforms. So back to travel accommodation and away from food. With that, we're going to close the morning session.